So, hello everybody. Just a very super quick introduction on myself. So, my name is Steve Usher. I live in Stockholm. I moved here 4 years ago, which has been hugely transformative both for me professionally and personally. As a pescatarian, my favorite pastime or my favorite celebration here is crayfish party, where you eat loads of these guys with schnapps. So, what's there not to like? Um, Personally, as a hobby, I've got a thing about kind of architecture and minimal design. For the last kind of 3 years, I've actually been practicing around living kind of more minimal lifestyle, which has been very, very cool for me. Professionally, I was super lucky in my early 20s to start a recruitment company in the UK. And never in my wildest dreams did I ever imagine I'd go on a kind of 16-year rocky roller coaster ride of running, growing and developing a recruitment company. Yeah, working exclusively in kind of the CX customer contact arena. After kind of exiting the company, I followed my next passion, which is candidate experience, and more actually focused on measuring the candidate experience. So the Google presentation earlier today took my attention, and they shared some great insights. But this is all about, one of the things in agency is you get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of candidate experience out there in the field. So I was on a mission to help companies quantify the brand perception impact and also a plethora of other insights. And also, I think the big learning for me was if you listen, it's amazing the amount of insights you can then generate to make improvements into your business. My curiosity for experiences continued, and I thought, how do you design an experience? And so that took me to Amsterdam, where I spent time with the Design Thinkers Academy. And that's when I found my next passion and my next thing in life, my mission. And design thinking for me has been transformative for me personally, but also as well the opportunities for HR functions and resourcing functions to really, really embrace a design thinking mindset, to really innovate and really solve some of these problems that are super prevalent today. Of course, like most people these days, but I started a podcast 2 years ago called The Experienced Designers. You can see where my career is going now. And finally, last year, I launched a design consultancy specializing in, of course, employee experience design. So that's my background. So today, let's explore. I think for me, let's just break outside our bubbles for today. So we're all kind of in your kind of talent acquisition bubble or whatever bubble that you're in. I just invite you all to just break outside of it. I'm going to take you outside the bubble. I'm going to show you stuff that perhaps is a little bit kind of left field, but I'm always going to bring it back in and relate it back into the field of talent acquisition and in-house recruitment. So 2020, it has to be definitely, or it has to go down as the year of the greatest stress test on employer brands. How organizations have handled COVID, whether that's furloughed or whether you've remained working from home or whether you've been made redundant, has been, I think for me, it's just, cut the wheat from the chaff very, very quickly. And we've got some beautiful examples like Airbnb, where it was a kind of just an amazing example of how to handle really difficult situations, but with humility. And then we've kind of got the Heart estate agency who got some really bad PR about the inhumane way in which they dealt with the redundancies. And also, as you all, I'm sure you're all aware, we've gone very, very super quick from this kind of candidate-led market into a job-led market. So this is also putting a huge amount of pressure and bringing challenges back into the organization and problems that we need to solve. So for me, I've kind of been coining this phrase is we need intentional design in the workplace more than ever. And so, earlier today, I think it was Sam Ellis and Cara Moore was talking about designing spaces for naps and stuff like that, which is really interesting. But I think for me now, like everything that we've always been in, like these default modes, like we've all been on our spinning wheels, but now kind of everything's changed and all these default positions that we've been in are now completely up in the air. And so I think it's now about we grab some of those things and those challenges rather than just let them drop down again into an other default position. We need to grab them and redesign them, but with intention, so they serve people and business much more effectively. So design thinking. There's been a lot of talk about design thinking. It's super mature in some areas. I would say it's definitely still coming into HR, and it's globally there is absolutely a movement happening. Employee EX as well as a discipline. We're seeing more roles being committed to inside organizations, head of employee experience managers, all of these kind of white glove focus roles on redesigning and focusing on the employee experience. And for me, design thinking and employee experience is completely the perfect match. So all I invite you to do for this particular side is just think in journeys for a start. So think about the employee experience. And we have these kind of holistic journeys that go on all the time. So we've got hiring, you've got onboarding, you've got engagement, you've got exit, you've got alumni. And all of these kind of overriding journeys can be absolutely intentionally designed with a real purpose. But if I just highlighted the hiring experience here, we also have a whole bunch of micro journeys that go on every single day. And some of these are now coming under some real pressure for resourcing functions and for organizations. And I think what was interesting listening to Google's presentation earlier today on the main stage is I'll just highlight these two. So these two were actually already on my slide, but when they mentioned it, it was super relevant, which is around communication and information journey. And they work on the premise of over information, or answering questions through communication before they're actually asked. And the only way you're ever going to do that is by understanding your candidates' needs and wants, so that you can preempt their questions before they actually ask them. So this is all about thinking journey. So when you're sitting in your chair, whether you're a day-to-day kind of actively out recruiting, or a TA director, head of TA, doesn't matter, anything in between, just start to bring your awareness to these little journeys that are happening in your business every day, and which ones do you think that you need to start improving. So I'm just going to break you outside your bubble for a second, so just bear with me with this. So design generally is everywhere. So I just want to bring your awareness to this fact, because we go on in our life every day, but we don't really take notice until we kind of, oh, that didn't know that even existed. So I just really want to bring your attention to a few things. So the first one is Apple. So I don't think any design-led presentation would be complete without mentioning Apple. So Apple, for me, were absolute genius years ago, still are, but they reimagined what they call kind of a peak moment in their customer journey. So, and this was the opening the box experience. So some of you may, obviously, if you've got Apple phones or Samsung products, but that moment when they first did this, I don't know if you remember, cast your mind back, everybody went crazy for opening up the box. And it was intentionally designed that way as a peak moment in the customer journey. So you kind of open up that top, and it was quite hard because of the suction to open up. And then you kind of go onto that first layer, which is obviously your warranty details and that little pin. And then you go down to a second layer, which is your or your cables. And then you go into your third layer, which is the last layer. And by that point, you really want to see your product. And then you open it out, pick it up, and then you've got one of the most satisfying moments, emotional moments, which is around peeling off that plastic. And that was all properly intentionally designed to create emotion at that peak moment in the journey. So all I ask you to do is just think about this now, revert this back into your candidate journey, hiring manager journey, even as a resourcing function journey. Where are these peak moments that you need to show up as a business, and how can you intentionally design them? So this one, when I found this image, I was like, oh my God, as a minimalist, my toes were curling. They still are, looking at it now. So for me, I mean, in its prime, it's confusing. There's multiple kind of duplications going on. And of course, over time, there's degradation, things are falling off, creating even more confusion. And, for me, in my mind anyway, I was thinking, is this kind of your application experience? I worked with a customer earlier this year, and we identified there was this kind of duplication of candidates having to provide information along the candidate or hiring journey. And it was just nonsensical. Why are we asking multiple times to provide information? This one, classic. So obviously not the wellies of choice for Glastonbury. But for me, when I look at these, you think, there's nothing worse than wet, soggy socks, right? So it's kind of that really uncomfortable moment of really wet socks, not for me. But I think this is kind of obviously a poor design, but could this be a representation causing discomfort, or something that's really discomfort that's going on in your business? And something that's been mentioned loads today, which is around diversity and inclusion. I think this is, for me, a really strong theme. And for me, how can we intentionally design a much more inclusive and diverse workforce? And it can be done. And finally, Dieter Rams. Some of you may have heard of him, Dieter Rams. He's one of my design heroes, an absolute genius. His Brawn products are legendary. And if you think about these products as kind of EX products for a minute, so let's have a look at this. Each one of these is kind of an onboarding experience. So the electric shaver is, say, your experienced hires. The record player is for your graduates, and the radio is for your developers, as for an example. So each one is catered and designed for, yet when you look at all of the products together, they are inherently Brawn, and they look, they've got the brand, the look and the feel. So again, each one intentionally designed, again, rather than like a broad brush or default. And Dieter Rams was really famed for his quotes. It's one of my favorites, which is, indifference towards people and the reality in which they live is actually the one and only cardinal sin in design. And I'm just wondering if we change that word design into business, I think generally. And so design is built on an intrinsic understanding of people, which speaks very much into this next segment. So I want to just talk to you about what is design thinking. This is kind of what I'm here to share with you today. So for me, there's lots of this with buzzwords and things like initiatives and all these things with these types of methodologies, is they can evolve and then lose the whole essence of what they are. So my purpose today really is just to provide a very simple overview, like what is design thinking? What is this thing? And secondly, is just to leave it with you in terms of open interpretation about, okay, how can I maybe apply some or all of this into some of the problems that I'm facing in my organization today? So let's get started. So the first one is, first and foremost, design thinking is a philosophy and a mindset. So if you think about the words design thinking, it is absolutely a mindset, okay? It's not like a program management thing. It's not this kind of project management step-by-step thing. It starts with you individually. For each and every one of you on this today, it starts in how you approach problems or challenges in your respective organizations. The second element to it is it's human-centered. So there are many processes for problem solving, design thinking focuses specifically on the human aspect of creative problem solving. So the great thing about this is that it keeps people at the very center of the process. So as long as you stay focused on the people aspect and listen to them directly, you can always arrive at the best solutions for them. And the great thing about design thinking is the more complex it gets, the stronger it becomes, because it's so deep rooted in users and people inherently. The third one is co-creation. So design thinking centers on working collaboratively and co-creating solutions. So it encourages people from different departments, skill levels, different functions, different competence, different perspectives. And I think it's a brilliant way, particularly if you're working in organizations where you've got a very set way, or you've got very siloed functions, or you've got this very hierarchical command and control type systemic environment. It's a great way to work laterally in your organization and solve problems through different perspectives. So if you're finding some of those challenges, particularly sitting from a resourcing perspective, there are definitely ways and means of which you can then start to co-create outside of your function to build a better solution. And finally, and I'll talk about share this with you in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides, it's iterative. So this is not a linear process. I can't stress this enough. This is about testing ideas, prototyping, getting feedback, and then iterating it over again. And the benefit to this kind of work is that what you're doing is when you come to a solution or you come to an outcome, it actually means that rather than forcing it on people and you've done the work in captivity, it means that it's got more chance of being embedded or indeed embraced in terms of those changes. And we see it all the time, particularly with technology, when we just throw a technology in, just see how it then sits into the organization, and then it may not be as effective as you would have liked, or certain initiative that you launch that just doesn't get the uptake. And they traditionally is because there's just been a lack of that engagement at the kind of grassroots level to really shape it to their needs and the users. So let's just go back and delve a little bit deeper into the mindset, because it's really important, because I'm going to share with you a couple of examples which I'm sure will resonate on some level. So last year, I had the absolute privilege of meeting Jean Liedtke, and she's like an absolute legend in design thinking and business innovation, based in the US, absolute character. Highly recommend Google her. She's got a brilliant course on Coursera, really cheap, and it's got a good basic overview of what design thinking is. So highly recommend that. But one of the kind of the challenges that she kind of shared was, obviously we've got our own shift in our own mindset, but we've also got to shift the mindset of others, particularly senior leaders. And so she created a kind of example persona called George, which represented a more fixed mindset, which exists in many organizations today, and no doubt could resonate with people that you come across in your business. So when you come across George's personas, there is only one right answer. Being right equals being smart. Seeking proof, not possibility. Winning debates, not fostering dialogue. And threatened by the unknown, and numbers are more real than people. And these are the people that we really genuinely need to influence. I'll come up against them quite often, particularly when pitching into organizations. And we need to work on how we can convince them that a human-centered approach to problem solving offers way more benefits. So I'm going to come back to George a little bit later. One other challenge just to share, just to hit home design thinking. The other challenge that we have relates to how we've kind of solved problems historically in organizations. So for an example, when we kind of have a problem, we normally kind of jump into what's going on? Sorry, we normally jump into a transformation mode. And then from transformation, we jump into strategy. We need to build out a strategy. And then that strategy needs to be operationalized. And then it hits the people. And so we kind of have this top-down approach traditionally in how we problem solve. And of course, if you think about overlay a hierarchy on that, what we tend to have is a lot of the problems or the solutions that are being built tend to be made in a room, but with senior or more kind of higher leaders in the organization without really engaging the kind of the people. And so if you just naturally think of it, reverse that order, start with people, then build out an operationalize aspect, then build out a strategy, and then do the transformation. And so this kind of post approach, been around for a long time, but absolutely hits home the fact around where design thinking, where it's rooted. So let's get into the methodology. So I'm just going to share this with you. Bear with me. I'm going to do a step-by-step, and then please just take it as it is and just kind of have your own interpretation. So this is a visualization that was created by Stanford Design School. So there's 5 modes of work. So there's empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So the first one is empathize. So this is the foundation of everything that you do. Cannot underestimate the importance of research and understanding and empathy. Again, mentioned in the Google presentation earlier, when they talked about empathizing for candidates. When he said that, I was like, yes, absolutely. And if you want to work on empathy a little bit more, highly recommend obviously Brené Brown's work, which is for me absolutely amazing stuff. So highly recommend. But this is about understanding the people you're trying to design your product or your service or your experience for. So this is about gathering information, user interviews, creating personas, trying to figure out who am I making it for, what is their problem, what do these people do, and empathizing with the people you're designing for. So for example, if you've got challenges with hiring managers as an example, and we all have them. So there's a proportion who are like a bag of worms. You've got another proportion that kind of pretty good, and you've got the other ones that are super engaged. So if you kind of have those kind of challenges in trying to develop a much more robust approach to hiring manager relationships with resourcing, for example, then it's absolutely, if you're doing it from a resourcing standpoint, putting aside for 1 minute all your assumptions, or you might have a certain hypothesis as to what's going on, just put it to one side and do your research. Like empathize with hiring managers, understand, walk in their shoes, and walk in their journey and understand what's going on. You will definitely generate plenty of insights to start then building solutions from and look for commonalities. The second one is define. So this is taking everything you've learned in the empathize stage and defining and breaking it down. So this is coming to conclusions to what people's needs are. So what are their needs? What are their challenges? What are their problems? What are we going to be able to use as information? And when you've got it all up on a wall and you've done your research and come together and collaborate and start to look at the research, you definitely start to see trends. This is a common problem. This is a common challenge. This was an observation. And this is about taking everything from the empathize section and turn this into insights. And this is what define is. The third one, ideate. So a lot of fun here, ideation. So this is about taking everything you've learned in the first two steps and coming up with solutions and ideas. So this is about coming up with potential matches of products and services and experiences and match with the insights that you've taken. So this is about coming together, coming up with ideas. If you walked in the room here, for an example, there'll be lots of post-it notes everywhere. There'll be lots of kind of people coming from different perspectives, sharing their ideas, then building the ideas on top of the ideas. So huge amounts of that co-creation and that collaboration, which I was talking about. And they're about thoughts and ideas that match what you learned in the previous steps. Step 4, prototype. So this is about taking all of these ideas and start to build something to think, not to implement. This is to think. And it could be you build a PowerPoint presentation that is a representation of one of your solutions. It could be a box, or, I mean, we've made stuff out of Lego. We've got things, you know, a product which is being made out of just boxes and taping things together. But just as long as it creates just a lo-fi kind of facade to your prototype, so that people can kind of get a feel for what that solution is all about. So just trying to make something really quickly and something you can test with real users. And that's the final step, test. So now in test phase, you're taking your prototypes and you're testing with real people. So let's go back to hiring managers. Let's say one of your prototypes that you've built is a lo-fi centralized intranet or some kind of toolkit area for all of your hiring managers to engage with. How to deliver EVP, how to deliver a great candidate experience, maybe some of your interview techniques, all these kind of things that you can then build out, and then bring various hiring managers in and start to showcase your solution. And the most important thing is, and you see this in the room, is the immediate reaction that you get. It's the emotional response to stuff. That's the gold, to understand, okay, is this working? And then also getting feedback in real time from real people as to where then you need to improve. So just bring you back to this. When you're doing your testing, and that I mentioned earlier about iterate, when you talk about testing, you're not going to be done at testing. So when you've sat, say, with hiring managers and got feedback, you could then go back to your ideate phase and say, actually, that solution isn't working, but the feedback actually has meant that the other idea that we had that we were maybe going to prototype, that could actually suit better. So what we then do is go back to ideate, you create your prototype, and then go back to your hiring managers and test it. And what you do that is that you do that over a number of iterations until you then come up to an optimal solution to then move that into an implementation phase. I can't stress to you enough, this is an amazing moment in the design process. It's such an enlightening moment because obviously you're really nervous, you create this prototype, is it going to work, is it not going to work? And then you just get to see people kind of come alive and just playing with your solution and seeing how it could work. And I think for me, there's not enough work done with companies, I think, in my mind, particularly with like RFI documentation, or if you're going out and mapping, I don't know, maybe a new ATS system, you know, start to kind of map out what do an empathize and a define stage, maybe put that as part of a showcasing where are the kind of key touch points and how can their systems align to your needs and your candidate and your hiring manager needs. I think more work could be done on that side to help really ensure that you're securing the best technology as well. And one last thing to share in relation to design is under each of these modes of working, the 5 modes, is there are loads of toolkits available. Like there's lots of toolkits that you can use, workshop formats, you know, whether it's ideation formats or prototyping. And this is, I just want to share with you because it's such an amazing resource. So if you're curious about maybe running workshops or doing some innovation workshops in your business, please go to Toolbox, toolbox.com. It's a free curated resource created by a lady here in Sweden, actually, in Stockholm, Jenny Thiolen, who's an amazing designer. And there's just an endless amount of resource in there. So just get stuck in and have fun with it and get a feel for what these design toolkits kind of look like. So let's just quickly go back to George, aware of time, is design thinking changes the Georges that use it. So we go from this kind of egocentric to empathic other focus. We go from this overwhelmed by differences of perspective to inspired and energized by deep insights and needs of people. And we're divided by difference, and we move into this converging around actually what matters. We move from this bringing one right solution into the room to just co-creating high order solutions together. Finally, we go from this kind of abstract, ambiguous type descriptions to much more concrete, tangible and testable. And so just to share this with you as well, I'm not saying I was kind of egocentric at all, but what I would say is there's a couple of points in here that's been when I kind of discovered design thinking, I think I've genuinely improved as a person. I think if I just could speak to my 20 self again and say design thinking, human-centered thinking when you're solving these problems, honestly, it really does make a difference. I think I've definitely improved as a person in terms of how I approach some of the things in my personal life, but also definitely professionally as well. So definitely on a mission to take this to a wider group of people. And so just on my last slide is, I just want to share with you, I just invite you to reflect. And on a previous IHR event, there was some of the attendees were invited just to some of their key issues. So I just want you to start to think in a design point of view. Here's some of the design challenges that I've been seeing are consistent. So how might we attract the most diverse workforce? How might we significantly improve our employee journey through pre-boarding, onboarding during the global pandemic? That's been a really interesting challenge. How might we improve the candidate experience during the recruitment process? And how might we shift our business to meet the new demands of our workforce after COVID? That's a big one. I think, we can definitely intentionally design all of this, and especially a hybrid working model, by taking a human-centered approach. It's super important right now that we get the balance between people's needs and the organizational needs. It's not skewed purely towards the organizational side. So I'm going to leave you, because I love a quote, I'm going to leave you one last quote, which is from Mark Levy. So Mark he's been like a pioneer within employee experience in the community. And he was the ex-chief people officer of Airbnb, did some amazing work, effectively deleted the words HR, created a full-on people experience function. And he's quoted by saying, employee experience is about doing things with and for people, not to them. So if you think about that top-down approach to the bottom-up, it absolutely resonates. And before I go, I just want to say to the community here is I'm offering a free, or actually I'm doing three. So I'm going to, here's a competition I'm doing. Please just register. There's the QR code, 5.studio/IHR. And for 3 lucky winners, I will facilitate for free a design workshop with you and your team, where we'll look to solve a challenge that you are having in your organization. So I don't know which design tool, depends on the problem, but we will definitely get into it. But it'll be about 90 minutes. It'll be fast, fun, and energetic, and we'll definitely get some outcomes for you. Deadline is by 30th, and I'll announce the winners on the 1st of October. So that is me. Thank you very much.
Steve, that was fantastic, and what a way to sort of round off a day of talks. You got me right at the start with the little bit with the Apple box there. That was brilliant. I think Martin's going to be joining us in a minute or two as well. He's tied up on a couple of things, but look, going into those soggy socks moments, it all relates, and I think we're going to get some questions. But you're doing this design thinking, and it makes perfect sense. Taking it to organizations, what are you finding the challenges when you're coming up something like this? You talked at the very start of thinking outside the bubble. Do people burst your bubble at that first moment when you go in and you've got all this passion for it?
Yeah, so it is a challenge, and mainly like anything, it's change, and it's a different way of solving problems. I mean, I think a lot of it is inherently in systemic organizations. It is that command and control, cascading type environments, very, very siloed. People tend to be quite safe. So if you come in with this kind of, yay, design thinking hat, and let's get some Post-it notes and all these, that kind of stuff just doesn't work whatsoever. What I've found that does work is the thing about design thinking, as I kind of mentioned, this is not like a linear process. It's a learn by doing approach. And the great thing is once you start, even just by doing some of the initial workshops, discovery workshops that we run, you can just start to see people starting to get it, because it's just how we engage. We create a super safe environment, and that's the most important thing. Facilitation skills of bringing different people together, introverts, extroverts. You might have a director in the room and maybe a junior in the room. So, and you want that because you want a diverse kind of group of perspectives in the room to start to solve some of these problems. And of course, what you were able to do, and that's where facilitation skills come in, is that you're able to generate really valuable perspectives, but with people feeling safe to share that, without them feeling stupid or oh, my boss is here, so I can't really say. And so it's this kind of it's little pigeon steps, as I call it. And also start with one thing. I mean, it doesn't have to be, let's just reimagine a whole candidate experience. It could be one of those micro journeys. Just start with one. I mean, it doesn't have to be a huge reinventive thing. So I think for me, that's for me. So if there's a stakeholder there, listening today, or, stakeholders that I've engaged, I've just encouraged them, where's the high impact, low effort stuff that's going on? How can we tie that into some of the existing metrics? So where can we start to influence that to showcase the opportunity of design? And that's kind of where I normally tend to kind of start with this stuff. Just keep it simple. You can blow people's mind with this stuff too quickly. It's a journey, and that's for me a big one.
Definitely. And I think you take us very well through the journey. And I encourage anyone still listening, on the 28 people here, we've got to have some questions come through for Steve. This is your chance to have a chat to him. One of the chances, and there's going to be a chance a little later on. But Steve, so we talked about challenges. You talked about how are you finding things now with COVID? And I know we've talked, you're in a very different situation over there in Sweden. There's a little bit more freedom and movement than there is here at the moment.
It had to come up, didn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, Jim, it's interesting because I think now we're having to reimagine pretty much everything. And I think some of the big hot topics right now is, without a doubt, I was talking to, there's a guy called Stefan Moritz, who works at McKinsey. He's a big kind of service designer here in Stockholm. Really huge respect for the guy. And we've become friends over the years. And we were just talking a couple of months ago, what's kind of happening out there. And I think one of the big ones is this hybrid model. How can we start to reimagine this kind of home working, as well as obviously in the office, and redesigning that? And then the other interesting one is, if we're going to reduce our retail footprint by 50%, as an example, there's a whole bunch of CFOs out there going, fantastic, there's a great opportunity to really cut some cost out of the business. But we also have to be super careful that we keep a human-centered approach to this. That how can we repurpose some of that space? How can we then ensure that those are, that space that we have now? So I think things like architect designers, workspace designers, I think they're going to be having a field day over the next kind of certainly 12 months, but certainly beyond that. Here in Sweden, I think it was this year, Spotify opened their brand new office. I think it was this year or last year, end of last year. So it was a really big thing. Interesting to see what happens with them, because I don't think anyone's going back to their office at the moment. So that's a really big one for me.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
And do you think that is design efficiency as well? So it's the whole thinking and process and the efficiency of everything that we're doing relating to people. Do you feel that efficiency? Well, we've talked about the efficiency in recruitment, making it easier and simpler for the people to apply all the way through the journey. Do you think that efficiency comes into play?
So it's just a great question. So here's a quick lesson, or something to share with people. There's a very big difference between a service and an experience. So just really, if I'll part this on you today, and this is taken from the experience economy methodology. So when you've got a service is all about making it quicker, easier, faster. So this is about spending less time with your candidates and making it more automated and quicker, easier for them to access information, for them to apply, and all of these. So when you think about journeys, there's a service line that cuts across that. There's also like a communication line that sits across that. There's a employer brand thing that cuts across that, which is super important. But when you move up the kind of the value chain, experiences is about time well spent. So that's a difference between a service, time well saved, to time well spent. And this is the key around experiences. So you need to find the moments in your journeys where you can get much better efficiency in designing the service. But then on top of that, to elevate this, to create the emotional connection, you need to find the moments where you can show up as a business and you can deliver an experience. And that's where the magic happens. So you immediately resonated to the Apple experience because you felt it more often, because you've probably gone through it. And that's because that emotion, you've gone through it. That's why you remember it. You recall it really, really easily. So this is about, I think, how organizations can start to use these type of approaches to start to really reaching side of people and really deliver experiences as well as a service. Don't get me wrong. And there's still a lot to do on the service side. Anecdotally, I'm talking to friends here in Sweden who've been trying to apply for jobs. Some people, 50 to 90% of job applications are not even getting a response to their application. So we've still got a long way to go, but without a doubt, I think the difference for me, if you think about this, the organizations who have a candidate journey or a hiring journey that are just by default versus ones that has been intentionally designed, who do you think is going to fare best? So,
yeah. And do you think, Steve, given, and we've got a question coming up, and I'll come to the question in a second.
Oh, I've got one out.
Do you think, yeah, and please more, we've got plenty of time here, another 5-10 minutes. So the front end of the journey, and we talk about that abundance of applications now to roles in some positions and the people not getting back to them. That very first element of designing, and we used to say, screen questions, make it simple, people to apply. Is there re-engineering of that point? Are we rethinking that design to say, let's manage the expectations right, let's ask more questions at that point? Is there a design element into that beginning of the journey?
Yeah, absolutely. But I just, I'll take you back to the five steps. I think I genuinely believe that a lot of organizations have not taken the time to empathize with their candidates. I'll say it. I just think there's not enough time taken to really understand their candidate user groups. And that might be, the difference of expectation from a programmer to a frontline call center advisor to maybe a finance manager. I mean, if you just think about it in functions, the needs and wants are massively different. There'll be, of course, an underlying consistency, and that's what you can design for across holistically, but there are individual nuances that you need to design for. And it's not complicated. You can't start to think, oh God, that's really complicated. We've got so many different roles in our organization. But actually there are ways and means of which you can just start to provide those little bit of personalized approaches to those things. And again, I've done journey maps, candidate journey maps, or hiring manager journey maps. I've done recruiter journey maps, and I've done interview journey maps, and you kind of overlay them all over and you get to see a whole bunch of stuff that's in there where, okay, there's communication breakdown that's impacting the hiring experience. How can we then, Google talked about it today. If we know a graduate, say, for an example, through research, we know these are the top 10 things that graduates are asking. So why don't we answer them before they ask us? And it just takes the pressure off our resourcing team. It's not difficult, but then how can we do that? Another good one we discussed recently with a client was, I think it was shared in the round table today, was when you reject somebody, how can you then say, by the way, you're rejected, and we didn't manage to get through to your CV because we had 1,000 applications. But just so you know, we partner with 3 other organizations in our local area, and they're also hiring as well. So here's their career site if you're interested. So just offering these little kind of snippets, really kind of thought process to how you can help people, particularly in these really difficult times. It's just these little micro moments that can make a really big impact in that journey.
Yeah, it seems to be breaking everything down and taking it little step by step.
Yeah.
So we have sorry, Steve, we have a question from an anonymous attendee. It makes sense while I go through it here. So we have recently had a lot of software and systems changes. Some are good and some are how would you approach the senior management team about abandoning a new system if you don't think it's the best option, or there are potentially better programs? Sometimes almost as if they've invested or pushed for something that they won't want to change to save face.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
It's a really great question.
Not an easy one.
Thanks for that, Anonymous. So I think just on a really basic level, you've got to convince hearts and minds in that. So, but without making it personal. So I think really the best, in my mind anyway, the best way is to kind of depersonalize it as much as possible in how you're then going to take somebody through a journey where they've implemented something. It's been a top-down approach by the sounds of it. There's been very little engagement around what people's needs and wants actually are. So you've kind of maybe got to start with that cycle and just kind of reverse that out, but use maybe some of the empathize phase to really understand why it's not working or where some of the impacts so there's 2 elements to this actually. I'm just thinking it out as I'm talking. There's an element to kind of depersonalize it out, just kind of get some anecdotal feedback and research back as to where things aren't working as part of this kind of system deployment. And obviously, if it is terminal and it really is having a detrimental effect, you want to obviously demonstrate why it's not working and show the gap between before and after. And then the other side could be, then you start to then bring something else more constructive to the table in maybe just showcasing through really solid research, what are those needs, wants and desires of those that are engaging in either the current or this future system? What is it, does it look like? And when you start to kind of bring that together, if you bring that to the table and say, look, we've got this feedback, but we actually have, these are the actual needs and wants and desires, and here's some of the kind of insights we've generated from this, you can start to see some gaps to show, actually, okay, maybe there's some merit to then starting to just shift their mindset or to engage a change in terms of dumping that system. But I think just get it back to your people, because the power of the group of feedback from your people, it just depersonalizes it in my mind. You give something that's really credible research for people, and particularly in these kind of leadership roles, to then utilize. So I hope that makes sense.
No, definitely. It's the candidate soggy socks versus your internal soggy socks for the wrong design thinking internally rather than just externally as well. Yeah. Steve, quite conscious of the time. Thank you very much. Martin's coming back in here at the very end, but look, fantastic. Really appreciate you finishing off today with that. And what a great main stage we've had, and some amazing talks and chats.
And it's not over yet, Jim.
Really good.
Well, I see what you've done there.